The case of Guinea, for example, a family being in power for 57 years. Are you the only family in Guinea? Are there no other Guineans? What gives you the right to think that the sun rises and sets in your household alone? It is this kind of sit-tightist approaches to governance, aided by misgovernance, corruption, opaque governance, directionless, hunger, thirst, melancholy, and social disequilibrium that make people to rise up and take up arms against their leaderships. Such taking up of arms, to me, against oppressors who masquerade under the thin guise of leaders, changing their constitutions at will to accommodate further terms. I do not regard it as a coup d'etat. I regard it as good riddance to bad rubbish. That is why I have written tons and tons of articles. My last outing on this was 40 pages. By the way, my keynote address today is 78 pages, but I'm just speaking to it. And I've sent it already to the Secretariat. My last outing on this was 40 pages, where I warned the Nigerian government not to lead or aid ECOWAS to go to Niger Republic to attempt to forcibly remove the interim military government, with Niger Republic having served borders with 7 states in Nigeria. The humanitarian catastrophe, displaced and dislocated people that you are going to cause will be unimaginable, added to our present insecurity, Boko Haram, armed banditry, kidnapping, hunger, thirst, disillusionment. Let me use this forum to warn the Nigerian government. Don't pay it. It is neither righteous nor justified to intervene. Not only because Niger Republic is a sovereign state, but also because we have no right to intervene and tell them how to govern themselves. Nigeria has never been told how to govern herself. From the first military purge of 15 January 1966, led by Major Kaduna Uzoguchukuma and other young majors, I didn't see the international community come here to tell us how to govern ourselves. The counter-coup, or rather, the counter-coup that removed General JTU Aguiyi-Ironsi, who ruled for 6 months, led by Murtala Mohammed, Danjuma and others, and the enthronement of a 32-year-old bachelor, later General Yakubu Gowon, to be head of state, who ruled for 8 good years between 1967 and January 15, 1970, the Armed Forces Day, when General Philip Effiong surrendered to General Olusegun Obasanjo. I didn't see the international community evade us or interfere in our foreign affairs. When Murtala Mohammed was killed, ambushed and killed in Ikoyi in 1976, and Olusegun Obasanjo was made head of state, with Yaradua as his deputy, I didn't see the international community come to tell us how to govern ourselves. When Obasanjo handed over power in 1979 to Alhaji Aliyu Shehu Usman Shegari, with Dr. Alex Ekweme Anigbo as his vice, I didn't see the international community come to lecture us how to govern ourselves. When that democratic government was forcibly overthrown by Major General Muhammadu Buhari on the 31st of December 1983, I didn't see AU or UNO or the International Human Rights Commission come to dictate to us how to manage our affairs. When gap-toothed General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, the man who described himself as the evil genius, removed Buhari from office on the 28th of August, 1985, I didn't see any international community intervention. When Babangida was forced by all of us in the civil society to abdicate power and step aside after counseling the most populist, the most transparent, the most credible elections ever held in Nigeria, not the farce and shambolic elections we have been having in the recent past, I did not see any international community come to tell us how to govern ourselves. When late Abacha removed the interim national nonsense, who they called interim national government, of business mogul and former chairman of USA, Chief Ernest Shonekan, in 1993, there were no international participants. And when the diminutive General Sani Abacha, but a very intelligent man, who institutionalized Nigeria's 6 geopolitical zones, where were the international community? And after both Abiola, the man who won that mandate, and Abacha died in mysterious circumstances in Asu Villa, where were the international community participants? And when General Abdulsalami Abubakar, the chairman of today's occasion, in absentia, took over power and within 11 months handed over to the democratically elected government of Obasanjo, I did not see any international community participate. So there is no reason whatsoever, and we have no moral high grounds or authority to go and intervene in other countries' internal affairs, sovereign countries with their sovereignty and suzerainty. Sir, Your Excellency, Secretary General, help me convey my very strong message to African leaders to give governance, good governance to the people, and where they are not ready for the gains, they should be ready for the pains. So international humanitarian law therefore seeks to achieve limitation of the effect of armed conflicts, to protect people who are not in armed conflicts or who are no longer participants. Maybe they have decided to quit. It also limits the methods of warfare. It is a practical set of rules designed for the battlefield, rooted in ancient civilizations and even religions. Armed conflicts have received so much patronage in Africa. And Africa has been a major contributor to resolving armed conflicts across the world, whether from the First World War or the Second World War, the war in Burma, and others. But have these long years under colonial tutelage contributed anything to Africa in return? Are we not still regarded from the white man's perspective as people of the early caves, Australopithecus, early cavemen, people they think are savages, jumping from one tree branch to another, when civilization actually started from Africa here? Secretary General, help me let them know that civilization started in Africa. You may need to pick up the book, Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. You may need to read about slavery and slave trade that dehumanized humanity for over 500 years. Man's inhumanity to man, degradation, servitude. The great roles of unforgettable historical prodigies, Thomas Clarkson, William Wilberforce, our own Olaido Equiano, to abolish this slavery. And how Abraham Lincoln picked up the gauntlet and made the proclamation for the abolition of slave trade, which led to his prompt execution in 1865 during the wars between the Southern Confederacies and the American Union. Has Africa progressed? I do not know. Or do you? That should be one of the issues you must interrogate. Do you know that the International Federation of Red Cross and the Red Crystal, they have done a lot to helping your organization, your commission, to resolve humanitarian distress during armed conflicts, to the extent that this organization that started operating in Africa in 1995, with over 35 offices across Africa, employing over 8,000 staff, has spent or spends close to $800 million every year on various humanitarian activities across Africa. So the law of armed conflict, also called the law of war, is a very ancient war. It's a very ancient concept with which international humanitarian law sets out to address and pose rules of engagement as to how to resolve conflict and how to treat war conflict situations, prisoners of war, and workers, humanitarian workers during wars. At the origin actually started, the Font Erigo, which is as old as history itself, started from the need for man to remove himself from the Hobbesian state of nature that I earlier mentioned. And it started with international customary law practices, ending up to the first Geneva Convention of 1864. Conflicts that started even by 1000 BC. So we had earlier war codes and norms before this Geneva Convention. Great jurists, priests, scholars, philosophers discuss these. The Art of War, for example, written in 500 BC by Sun Tzu, a great Chinese writer. The one by the Code of Manu, written in 200 BC. The 300 BC philosophy of Stoicism. The Age of Reason and Renaissance. It was not until in the 19th century, the 1864, with the enactment of the coming to force of the Geneva Convention, that we can say we had a reset of norms. But before then, a French and Austrian forces had fought in northern Italy on June 4, 1859, called the Battle of Sefrino, and one Henry Donat, appalled not so much by the violence that attended that war in the battlefield, but with the desperate and miserable situation of those caught in the web of the war. He gathered people and treated over 40,000 victims of that war. We had the members of the Society for the Public Good by President Gustav Munier, who was impressed by Donan's book. All these led to the formation of the International Red Cross, Red Crescent, and other bodies. So that 1864 Geneva Convention was arrived at for the first time to reduce armed conflicts, and they became regulated by general law. Ten concise articles were formulated by 1882, 18 years after. The modern development of international humanitarian laws, such as the rules protecting the wounded, adopted in 1864, were revised in 1906, 1929, 1949, and 1977. So critics have therefore accused international humanitarian law of always being one war behind reality. One war behind reality. In my 77-page dissertation, I've chronicled the various conferences, the 1868 St. Petersburg Declaration, the 1899 conference convened by Sir Nicholas II, the 1906 Geneva Convention, which expanded the articles to 33 so as to take care of the wounded and the sick during armed conflicts. And other various conventions that have since emanated and developed. 1907, 1925 Protocol, the Swiss Confederation Conference of 1929, 1949 Post-World War II Convention, 1954 Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property, known as the Hague Convention. The 1977 period and humanitarian rules governing civil wars, that's non-armed conflicts. The 1980 period and prohibition of use of certain conventional weapons. The 1993 Chemical Weapons Convention. The 1995 period, 1997 period, 1998 period, 1999 period. 2000 Geneva Protocol on prohibition of involvement of children in armed conflicts. The 2003 Multilateral Protocol that deals with unexploded and abandoned remnants of war. The 2005 period and adoption of the Red Crystal as against Red Cross and Red Crescent. You have all of them in my paper. And please, Secretariat, kindly circulate to all of them when we finish. Because a 77-page document cannot be spoken into within the few minutes have been given. The 2013 Arms Treaty is there. The 2017 Prohibition on Nuclear Weapons. We also have the international human rights laws as against international humanitarian law. One can be suspended, the other cannot, because it is global. I also discuss international law versus international humanitarian law and the differences. Then the fundamentals of public international law, I discuss. The promotion of human rights, that's the United Nations Charter, fundamental principles to promote human rights. Strict limitation on the right to use force against other states. And the strict prohibition on the acquisition of territory of other people by force. I discuss jus cogens and jus ad bellum and jus in bello and the differences between these concepts. I discuss international humanitarian law and the responsibility to protect. Protection of population from particular crimes, genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. By the grace of God, I'm a counsel at the International Criminal Court at The Hague. I also treated sources of international humanitarian law via treaties and customary international law. The general principles and judicial decisions emanating from them. Then the basic concepts of international humanitarian law. Persons held in combat as people who are now out of combat or have surrendered. How do you treat them? Can you kill or injure an enemy who surrenders after they have quitted? What do you do with the weak and the sick? What of captured combatants and civilians? What of those involved in humanitarian services? What do you do with them? I dealt with methods of welfare, principle of reciprocity, the issue of respect for methods of warfare. I dealt with international armed conflict and non-international armed conflicts, that's civil wars, and the difference between them. I also dealt with other conflict situations, then zeroed in on the law of armed conflict, which regulates the conduct of hostilities, including the use of weaponry and the protection of victims in situations of both international and non-international internal conflicts. I gave the example of the first Gulf Civil War of 1991. I discussed combatants and non-combatants, like medical personnel, chaplains, civil defense personnel, members of the armed forces who have acquired civil status, corps men, medical officers, chaplains, imams, technical crew, contractors, representatives, how to treat them. This law deals with them. Then I discussed the general principles of the law of armed conflict, which is that the fundamentals of it is to prevent the use of any kind of force which is not required for the purpose of resolving a war. That's the principle of proportionality. A war is simply to disarm and degrade and downgrade your opponents. It is not really meant to kill or to punish civilians. I discussed the principle of necessity, arrived at the 1868 St. Petersburg Declaration, and the principle of proportionality, which is also known as the principle of humanity, that military objectives are not to attack civilians as civilian objects. Then African and international humanitarian law, I looked at it in great detail. I looked at the armed conflicts and decades of atrocities from Angola to Burundi. Oh, this is generous of you. 10 minutes more? I thought it was 3. Thank you very much. From Angola to Burundi, Cameroon, Rwanda, the Rwanda genocide, the Hutus and Tutsis. I was there with my wife 2 years ago, and the young lady who took us on a sightseeing across the state, I asked her, where are you from? Are you Hutu or Tutsi? She said, no, sir, I can't answer that question. I said, why? He said, because I'm a Rwandese, I'm from Rwanda. I said, I know. Originally, were you from Hutu or Tutsi? He said, I'm sorry. All Rwanda people are regarded as one. This was in Kigali, where I had a bet with a friend of mine before traveling out with my wife. My friend told me, if I saw a piece of paper anywhere on the streets of Kigali, that he will pay me 1 million naira. I told my wife, I thought I was a poor man. I'm going to be rich. Because I will see not only pieces of papers, I will see dumps of refuge. For the 10 days, about 10 days or so that we were in Kigali, Rwanda, trust me, speaking straight from the heart, I never saw a piece of paper on the streets. These people even wash the trees that line the streets for beauty. A small country in Africa, once ravaged by internecine war. Can we say this of Nigeria, the giant of Africa, with over 225 million people by latest United Nations projections? I do not know, or do you? Poser for all of us. From Central African Republic to Chad, Cote d'Ivoire to Djibouti, Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, to Egypt, Eritrea to Ethiopia, Liberia to Libya, Mali to the Congo, Gabon to Nigeria, Niger to Sierra Leone, Somalia to South Sudan, Sudan itself, Burkina Faso, Mali, Uganda. The death toll alone in all these conflicts is overwhelming. During the Second Congo War, not less than 5.4 million people died. During the bloody 3-year Nigerian Civil War, not less than 3 million Biafrans were killed. There is a great writer, Mr. Greenwood. He told us that the theory that humanitarian law is essentially Eurocentric is in reality more than a criticism of most literature on the subject than a reflection of historical fact. It says it's a reality when we say it is Eurocentric. This is because of the ravages of colonialism and even now of neo-colonialism. We all remember the partition, the Berlin partition of Africa. They came, they would just say, Portugal, which side you like? I bet take that side. France, you like that side? Take. English people, do you want Nigeria and others? Oh yeah. The great I don't know how to put it. That was how Africa was divided and shared. So they have tried again and again to still believe that we are terra nullius, either no man's land or savages. Help me tell them we are not. Help me tell them that Africa, even if you look at the world map, is at the center, is the heartbeat of the world. We must now shun that narrative which made Mungo Park, which made historians to write that Mungo Park discovered the river Niger at Kainji, New Busa. How do you discover a river where you met inhabitants drinking the water, taking their bath with the water, and you tell us that you discovered it? That is his historical profanity. It's an abomination. It's egregious. We should not allow others to write our history for us. So my contention here is that in spite of Africa's great participation and contributions to the entire world, from World War I to World War II, to various wars, and to international peace and security, we are not accorded our rightful place. Africa needs to be accorded her rightful place. And the international humanitarian law, I will read my brother Dr. Ezekiel's book later, and I hope you treated that very seriously, should now begin to beam its searchlight on its development in Africa, because a candle does not lose its flame by lighting other candles. Tell them that you cannot cover the sun with your finger. Tell them you cannot clap with one hand. The Western world, they need Africa just as Africa needs them. We are Siamese twins, tied together by the same umbilical cord of humanity. As I round up, I looked at how Africa tried in its own way to evolve in this scenario. The 2020 conference on silencing the guns by 2020, which was called the flagship program. The African Peace and Security Architecture, APSA, which is the main pillar, which is the Peace and Security Council, of which the Peace and Security Council is the main pillar. The Peace and Security Council itself, which is the standing decision-making organ of the AU for the prevention, management, and resolution of conflicts. The protocol relating to the establishment of the Peace and Security Council, which was adopted on 9th July 2002 in Durban, South Africa, and came into force in December 2003. The powers of the Peace and Security Council, I have itemized for you carefully how to anticipate and prevent disputes and conflicts, undertake peacemaking and peace-building functions, authorize the mounting and deployment of peace support missions, recommend to the Assembly, pursuant to Article 4H of the AU Constitutive Act, institute sanctions whenever a constitutional change of government takes place, implement the AU's common defense, institute action, maybe economic sanctions, political sanctions, diplomatic sanctions, but not frontal attack on a sovereign state. To promote harmonization and coordination of efforts between the regional mechanisms and the AU so as to promote peace, security, and stability in Africa. I discussed the panel of the WISE, which supports the PSC and the chairperson of the AU. I discussed the African Network of Women in Conflict Prevention and Mediation. I discussed the Continental Early Warning System, one of the pillars of the African Peace and Security Architecture. I discussed Peace Fund, set up under Article 24 of the Protocol, to finance AU's peace and security operations. I discussed the African Standing Force, a key mechanism for advancing African agency in addressing the continent's peace and security threats. The African Union, regional economic communities, and regional mechanisms. I discussed all this. And my conclusion is that the International Human Rights Commission should, as much as possible, encourage Africa in the development of our international humanitarian laws